This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at javascriptjabber.com/KendoUI.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Views on Vue. I'm Chris Fritz from the Vue core team. Today on our panel, we have Joe Eames, teacher and organizer of Framework Summit.
Hey everybody.
We also have Divya Sasidharan, Vue developer, contributor, and also organizing Framework Summit.
Hello.
And today we have three guests, actually. This is, I think, unprecedented on Views on Vue. And our guests are Jacob Schatz, Filipa Lacerda, and Phil Hughes.
Hiya.
All from Gitlab. So we basically have like a Gitlab panel of people who are joining us that actually almost outnumber us if you had one more person.
We're evenly matched. If we had a tug of war, it would be anybody's game.
So could we go around and just do a quick intro of each of you and your role at Gitlab and then we can jump into some questions. And Jacob, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I started at Gitlab as a front-end developer, the first front-end developer, and then I became a front-end lead. And most recently, I have joined the data science team as a staff data science engineer and still using Vue there as well.
Oh, cool. What about you, Filipa?
Well, I've been a front-end engineer since I joined, and I've been working with the CICD team and the security products team, mostly developing features there.
Cool. And Phil Hughes.
So I've been here 2.5 years, and most recently I've been working on the web IDE. I guess it's the biggest main feature that everyone seems to know about now.
Mm-hmm. Great. And how many time zones are all of you spread across? Because you're a distributed team at GitLab, right?
Yeah, too many time zones to count.
I think three people, 3 time zones. Is that correct?
Oh, at least here, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
we are in two. Yeah, me and Phil are in the same one.
Oh, you and Phil are in the same time zone?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, like daylight saving times.
I see. I thought maybe you were an hour off.
Across GitLab, probably 16, maybe more.
Wow. All right. So something I'm kind of curious about, we had Filipa on before and we talked about, the style guide at GitLab, documentation, division between components, how they decide some of those things. And today I'd really like to take a step back and talk about like how GitLab decided to adopt Vue. Like what was that process like?
Yeah. So it was sometime, I think it was in December maybe of 2006. I don't remember exactly the date. Somewhere there's a post in one of the issues where we started talking about Vue, and Phil and I started talking about it and the benefits and all that stuff. And then Phil started taking a look and he talked about it with our one other developer. And do you remember that, Phil? That was a long time ago. We really have to jog our memory.
Yeah, so it's over 2 years now. I remember the first chat with Jacob and I was pretty adamant that we weren't going to use Vue. I didn't see the benefit of using it just for a single button.
Oh, so that's interesting.
We had quite a lengthy discussion with Jacob trying to convince me that it was worthwhile. But in the end, I was like, sure, we'll just give it a go. Sort of, I guess it worked out well for us.
Yeah, and at first we tried it. So what I did is I created a proof of concept. And I actually didn't complete my proof of concept because I wound up having to write all this Rails code to make it work because like the way that Rails is, put together, I think it works best when you're like when you're working with like an API or you're returning JSON or, something similar to the way that Vue works today, which was not the way that our Rails was working at all. It was all this HAML and stuff like that. So I did a bunch of projects on the outside and I was like, oh, wow, this is really, really, really easy. And I just remember when I joined GitLab, Dimitri's our CTO was like, hey, can you make our issue page, like close and open the issue with an AJAX call? And I remember I did it in jQuery and it was fine and it worked. And, but, just even that, because there's like a status over here and there's the button at the bottom and all these different things. I remember it was like quite a bit of jQuery code just to make that work and to catch all the different conditions. And I remember when I first tried out Vue and I was like, this is just so much less code.
And also like better organized. Like I found that when I was using jQuery for stuff, or like in projects where, there's already jQuery and, I'm just, adding a little bit more jQuery. I find that I have to do a lot more work to keep everything organized. Whereas with Vue, like it doesn't just give you like tools to do things like fast. It also gives you a way of organizing all of your code so that you don't have to think about, okay, well, where is this going to go? And, should I have like this kind of function and then this kind of function?
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that, especially in the beginning, I mean, I don't think Vuex was out yet, or I'm not sure. Phil, do you remember if Vuex was out yet?
I don't even think we even considered it at the time.
We definitely didn't consider it. And when I was looking at Vue in the beginning, even the state that Vue was in with no like super clear instructions of how to organize the code, it was already easier to organize the code than it was with the jQuery. Because with jQuery, you really have to make a really active. You have to make it an active part of your day to make sure that you don't start creating all this crazy spaghetti code. But with Vue, it's much less code and it's just easier to organize, even without the external tools. It was just really fantastic.
It's better encapsulated out of the box.
Yes, that's a good way to say it. Yeah.
Hey, I want to ask a little bit of a follow-up question to that. So of the frameworks that are available today, there's kind of the scale on unopinionated to highly opinionated, right? And Vue definitely doesn't fall on the highly opinionated end, but it doesn't also fall on the highly unopinionated end. So when you're talking about like organization of code and that sort of thing, that's usually one of the areas that falls into the opinionated section. So you found it to be you found it to be very useful for helping you organize your code. Did you find it to be stifling in any way? Or did you, obviously a lot better than jQuery, because jQuery essentially gives you zilch. But did you find that you could still organize code the way that you wanted to organize it? That you had some flexibility within it? Maybe speak to that a little bit.
I think when we originally picked up Vue, I know that we picked it because it made our lives easier and it was creating less code. I don't even necessarily think we picked it because of the organization factor behind it. I mean, it definitely was a help, but it wasn't like one of the major keystones. It happened to be that too. But and I was saying this before that you can write Vue in an unorganized way. Like you can definitely do that, especially without Vuex, and you can do it in in your own opinionated way, but then when you add on Vuex, you also have that super opinionated way. So in that way, it is both like opinionated and non-opinionated. And I think the way we started, Phil, you probably could talk about this, is that we started with like a very, like, let's just see, like, how are we going to write Vue? We didn't start with like a super big, like opinionated plan in place, right?
Yeah, we didn't really have a discussion of how we were going to do it. We sort of just went straight into it and didn't really think about it. And there's probably still some code in there that resembles that we need to get rid of. We didn't really have a style guide either or best practices internally. It was just, let's write some Vue code and go for it. And everyone sort of had their own way of doing it. And it wasn't the best, really.
But it was a huge improvement. It was a huge improvement over what we had before.
It's one of the reasons we had to document everything, because we didn't really thought about it properly. So we end up with a lot of Vue applications with different architectures inside GitLab at the same time. And that was very hard to maintain.
And Filipa, you were coming into GitLab after they had already started adopting it, right?
Yeah, Vue was already there. I think Phil had already done 2 or 3 features we did. I think issue boards were already done by the time I joined.
So you come into it at this point and see like people just, doing whatever they want, like the Wild West of a code base.
Yeah, and then I push forward for the documentation. So this is not how we do it.
I think that's extremely valuable. So you moved away from jQuery, and it sounds like part of the reason is you wanted something to be a little bit more organized. Were there things that you needed to do that jQuery just wasn't cutting it for, or was it just an organizational benefit?
I think it was mainly not the organizational part, but the fact that the DOM manipulation, like with the issue boards, Phil will know better, but like you have drag and drop and a lot of DOM manipulation that in jQuery you couldn't do that fast. Or, well, if you do, you have a lot of DOM to clean up after.
So were there some performance issues with the jQuery in some cases?
And it wasn't even necessarily the performance was one thing, but just the code, the sheer amount of code and the state management and just trying to write all that and keep it clean and take care of every situation. Because we did have, like, I think one of the first things that I wrote when it was, I think it was just Phil and I, was there's a sidebar in the issue, which you click it and it opens a drop down. And when I originally joined GitLab, you would click save and it would refresh the whole page. It would close the drop down and refresh the whole page. And we wanted to make that an Ajax thing. And there was just a lot of things to keep in mind because you were essentially creating like an app there. Just that sidebar with the 4 things was like its own little miniature app. There's a lot of state things to keep in mind when you're doing jQuery, and you can easily miss that. And so there were like these little things that popped up. And when you use Vue kind of by binding to different variables, it kind of immediately gets rid of a lot of those bugs that you normally have in jQuery because it's kind of taking care of all this. You know, you set one variable and it's going to change it in all the different places versus jQuery where you say hide this and then you have to set all the different states unless you're writing jQuery in a super organized way.
Mm-hmm. But that's up to you to be that disciplined.
Right. And but we definitely weren't doing that and that's a tricky thing to do, to write jQuery in that sort of way, which is why Vue was so fantastic. So it got rid of a lot of bugs just by implementing it. Like I think if we would have implemented the issue boards from scratch with jQuery, with all that dragging and all of those state management things, I think it would have taken just a tremendous amount more time to do it. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, issue boards is crazy. There's just so much state going on that we need to keep track of. There's the list on each card, there's labels, there's assignees, there's the issue number. And all this is just crazy. We just get it back through one Ajax request. It all just renders and we just handle the drag and drop and send off Ajax requests.
So it sounds like you are getting to a point with the jQuery where people were afraid to work on some parts of the app. And maybe there were some parts of the app where it's like, I think Phil knows what's going on here. Maybe we can have Phil do this one. Because no one else really understands what's going on because there's so much you have to keep in your head. Was that the case?
Yeah. There's always so much to keep track of.
Do you remember Notes.js, which is the thing that took care of all the commenting and the Ajax requests with the commenting and stuff? That was all jQuery and like particularly complicated. And you kind of always entered it with caution. It was well written. There was just like nothing wrong with it, but it was tricky. It was tricky stuff.
Yeah, and because it was compiled from CoffeeScript to JavaScript, it was like a script. The JavaScript was very, very bad. You would have all this bad syntax on it. It's hard to read. So that made it even worse.
Yeah. So there was one weekend where I had been trying to figure out how we were going to convert from CoffeeScript to JavaScript because it was clear that like everybody wanted to write JavaScript. And we could like advance ourselves so much further because ES6 had already been, ES6 was already surpassing the things that CoffeeScript was trying to fix. And we wrote this script that would just take the output of CoffeeScript and make it our source code. And then that wound up creating a lot of like compiled like CoffeeScript. Now, I think Winnie went in there and like fixed all of the crazy little isms that CoffeeScript created and fixed all those. But it was
isms.
Kind of like
what do you mean by that?
So like CoffeeScript, like it's doing these ES6 like things. In order to do that, it has to write it in ES5. So
like wrapped functions in wrapped function in
right.
some invoked functions. It was so bad.
So in order to do like in order to do like the fat arrow, like to keep that scoping and everything, it had to like wrap it and then it had to like declare.
It was the wasting part of it. Yeah, it was very hard to read.
Yeah.
You would have like 10 lines of ESLint disabled things in the top of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh no! So you were using ESLint, but
everything was disabled.
Like weren't matching with it. Oh no!
It was
very bad. Yeah.
Yeah. it was like we would eventually get to the point where we had ESLint in good nick, but it took a little bit of time. Yeah.
That was actually a good thing because the ESLint edition was from a contributor, like was from someone that wasn't working with us at the time. So it was actually a great thing that you get linting for free. None of us had to work on it. Someone else did.
And then we hired him.
Yeah.
And what was going into Vue? I'm sure it wasn't just roses all the time. It's like, oh wow, I just feel so much better about our code. We have no pain points.
Oh no.
What were some of the thorns? What were some of the what were some of the thorns, and especially early on? Like it sounds like Phil had some hesitations about Vue. Like, what were some things before you even adopted it that you were worried about?
So for the first major feature we did, it was there's little buttons on merge request comments that you click, and then it resolves the comments and it resolves discussions. And in my head, I'm thinking it's just a simple click event on a button. Do we need Vue for this? And then me and Jacob just talked about the state that we need to manage and how we need to update like 10 DOM elements at once. So I sort of came around to it. And then, so that was probably the biggest hurdle. And then after that, the biggest hurdle was integrating the Vue into jQuery. So all the comments poll in jQuery, and we need to then initialize the actual component inside of a jQuery element. And it just got super hacky, and it was just horrible to work with.
It was that mixture of, because we were working with Haml, and the Rails way of doing things is where you have CoffeeScript, and like it does its own JSON, like not JSON. It's like it injects HTML into the page. It has its own special inject function, or jQuery uses a special inject function. So it does all that, and so like when I first joined, like day one that I joined, like everything was this like .js.erb thing, or .js.haml, I think it was. And like you have this one file that's .js.haml where it's like a mixture of Ruby, Haml, and JavaScript, and it just gets injected in. And then like trying to like, because the app is just like, we have so many features. We have a lot of features. And so you're trying to like take that out and put the Vue stuff in. And obviously you're not going to rewrite everything. So
you don't want to completely greenfield it, because you don't want to just stop developing any new features for a few months while you work things out, and probably possibly fix some bugs, but possibly also create some new bugs by throwing everything out and recreating it all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that, well, I mean, and our thing is to we're constantly moving, we're creating new features, we don't stop. And so to like say we're going to switch over to Vue is not something where we have to switch over to Vue while not stopping to create new features. We have to keep the train moving.
So how did you resolve that jQuery Vue integration? Are there any tips that you have that you've developed when it's like, oh wow, like this is a way that works really well?
The tip is don't do it ever.
It was a slow process, though. It wasn't like, I think that's the big thing, is that it wasn't overnight. There was a lot of things that we had in mind, like a big plan in place, like we wanted to have Webpack in, and we wanted all these different things.
So we use Bootstrap, which is jQuery, and we have a few bugs. So I think the most recent one, we were discussing it last Tuesday, we have a list we have an array of objects, which is basically an array of users. And for each of them, we render an avatar. And because we use Bootstrap tooltips with Vue, if you over any avatar, the username will be exactly the same because, jQuery doesn't update like Vue. So there's this kinds of problems all the time. We created directives and mixins to handle the Bootstrap plugins for Vue.
So there are some cases where you created Vue directives to sort of wrap bits of jQuery to make it fit into Vue. Okay.
We are now getting rid of it, or the plan is to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. But that's a good tip. I think that makes sense.
I think the biggest thing is to move incrementally. We didn't, like Webpack didn't come in until much, much, much later. And so we were using sprockets, which is that was really difficult. I'm trying to remember how it all went down, Phil. Do you remember?
Yeah, Sprocket isn't the best to work with. I remember when we moved from CoffeeScript to JavaScript, we had this weird .es6 file extension so that we could write ES6 code. And that was a bit weird.
Yeah.
I'm so sad that that got dropped. It was such a wonderful extension. I remember having files like that.
Me too.
It was a gem that allowed us to write ES6. And so then we were writing ES6, and then we had to switch over to Webpack. And every one of these big major things we did was like a huge undertaking. It was like an absolutely massive undertaking.
Is there anything that you'd go back and change, like with the knowledge that you have today? You know, if you could be like the ultimate consultant for GitLab from the future, you know, what kind of advice would you give them?
I was going to say what Filipa said, don't do it. But
really? You regret it?
I wouldn't say don't do it. I just think that, and I'm not even sure like if you had to do it again, if we, like I think Filipa's thing, like when Filipa came in, she really was fantastic in the way that she was like, we need to have a consistent way that we all write Vue. We need to, and so like, I think if a little more planning went in from the get-go to say like, this is how we're going to write Vue. And to be clear, I mean, like at the time, there wasn't like a whole lot of that because we adopted Vue very early on in the Vue days. So there wasn't a lot of that in there. But I think if we would have all came up with a plan, which is also tricky because you're still trying to like create new features and not stop and all that stuff. That's the trickiest thing. You're trying to like hop on a moving train. But I think if we could have like solidified the way that we were all going to write it from the get-go, that might have helped out.
Yeah, we struggled when we added Vue, but then we struggled again when further down the road we added Vuex because, well, it's very permissive the way you can use Vuex. There's not like a very strict guideline on how you should use it. So it took us a few months to know exactly what we wanted.
And I don't think everybody was necessarily in agreement about how we should do. Like even once we started using it, not everybody was in agreement about the way to write it, even though we already had docs and all that stuff. So I think, you know, like coming to a consensus, although I mean, I think it worked out in the end just fine. It was, you know, sometimes it's like ripping a Band-Aid off to get these things going. Yeah.
So would you say that one thing you would have done maybe earlier is to establish those like best practices, like have those discussions about how you're writing Vue?
Oh yeah, definitely. But hindsight's 2020, right? I mean, a lot of the reasons that I know these things now and a lot of the things that we know now is because we got to go through like a bunch of different learning experiences.
Oh yeah, but this scenario is consultant from the future.
All right.
So it sounds like you'd go back in time and essentially say like, okay, there's this woman, like this fantastic engineer named Filipa Lacerda. You need to hire her now, not later.
Right. You got to get her to apply like earlier so that she can, crack the whip and tell us all how we should be writing Vue from the get-go. I mean, I think that once we all adopted it, really, when you are all writing code in the same way, you spend less time reviewing code because, and if someone's not writing it in the same way, you can say, hey, let's all write it in the same way. And it just makes it easier to review it.
Yeah, it's true. And on code reviews, like reviewing a merge request or however the process is at GitLab, it can be really easy for discussions to devolve around, well, I prefer this and I prefer this. And then you're not really going anywhere. And eventually you just like go with whoever, the senior developer is, or you just go with whatever's already there, or,
There's
whatever.
a lot
And
one of your best engineers quits
every time it comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like front end development is very tricky because there's so many different choices. It's a fire hose of information. And even within like Vue, there's like so many different choices. And sometimes it's hard to come to a consensus on like what the right thing is to be doing. And you have to gain so much knowledge really quickly. Like Vuex is not something that you just pick up super, super quickly because it's got, there's opinions behind it and there's ways to do things and you got to kind of figure your way out. And if someone comes in and says, okay, we should do Vuex, it's like, wait a second, what's Vuex? And while you're continuing to do, and so you're writing style guides and all this stuff. So if I could go back And I'm not even sure if Vuex was there at that time, but I think we would adopt it from the beginning if we could. Or the second that it came out, I would say adopt it and find out.
I think we actually discussed using Redux at the time because Vuex wasn't a thing. We actually discussed using Redux. I think it was when we refactored the environments page, and then it was pulling, and then the user was clicking through it. So you had two states to manage. I remember, I think the three of us and some other people were at that call that we discussed. I think a state management, a better way to handle state management.
Yeah. And I didn't want to adopt Vuex. I thought it was stupid in the beginning. I thought it was like I was so confused as to why, like what the point of it was. What was this like pattern? And Filipa kept trying to pound it into my head, and I was not getting it. So yeah, it definitely took me a while.
So you were the Phil in this scenario.
Yeah,
saying like, "Do we really need this?"
Right.
I think it's good to have a person like that pushing back and asking questions. Making sure that everybody understands like why you're doing this.
I think, though, that there's got to be a lot of people out there that there's got to be people that just don't understand. Like at the same position that I was, like they're seeing like Vuex and they're like, "What is this? What is this thing? What's the point of it?" and all that. And I wonder, like, how do you get them to the point of understanding that I'm at, that it is actually a good thing, and get them there faster? It's a tricky thing.
Actually, the first two features, I think, where we used Vuex, we ended up with more state problems than without Vuex, because of this. Like most people don't understand what you should do with Vuex. So if you're familiar with Redux, probably it will help. But if you're not, it's hard to get into.
Yeah.
Are there any resources or explanations that you found have been really helpful for getting everybody at GitLab on the same page in terms of like what Vuex is, like what kinds of problems it solves and how to use it?
Yeah, we added some documentation, and we'll probably be doing some training for everyone in the next month or so, some mandatory thing. But I think there's a very good talk from, I think her name is Clarklin. She gave it at the first React Conf. And she does code cartoons. I'm not sure if you ever heard of it. And she gave an amazing talk explaining how to manage state with Flex. And I think that is mandatory if you want to understand either Flex, Redux, Vuex, anything related.
Oh, that sounds great. I'll have to get that link later so we can drop it in the show notes.
Yeah.
The thing that solidified it for me is we have developer Fatih, and I just sat with him and I was like, okay, explain Vuex to me. And I recorded it. And I watched it a couple of times, and then I started doing some stuff with Vuex, and that really helped me a lot. Just having someone sit down with me. It wasn't that I didn't understand it before. I was just trying to understand like why.
Yeah, you could kind of understand like what's going on, but you're not sure like how is this helping?
Right, because you have a store and like you can follow pretty good practices before, and it's talking like you can kind of like get the same thing done sort of with just Vue if you're really careful, but it's not until you actually start using it on much larger applications, especially the modules. And I don't even think we started using modules for quite a while after we started using Vuex.
I think you use them, don't you, Phil?
Yeah, we didn't really have a need for them at first. So most thing that uses at the moment is the web IDE, and there's these different parts of the actual interface to sort of lend itself to these modules where it can mind its own state, its own actions, its own mutations.
Yeah, because our applications are usually very small. Like you have one single page application per route, so there's not much usage for modules except the web IDE that handles the routing and handles everything on Vue. Besides that, there's not much usage for that. Yeah.
Right.
You were mentioning issues that you were having at the beginning when you first integrated Vuex. Was that, can you speak more to that? Because was it a matter of like you were overcomplicating things, or was it something that you just didn't know how to use, or it wasn't needed for the time that you were integrating it, or like what exactly?
Yeah, no, the pattern we saw was mutations being committed from the components and not following a meaningful actions. Like you would see actions being dispatched, but they would have no meaning. Like you wouldn't know why exactly things were being changed at that time. So I think that was the biggest problem.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of like overusage of like refs and things like that, which when tied into like Vuex, made a little bit of a mess. That's some of the stuff that I saw too.
So accessing the refs is sort of an escape hatch to do some manual DOM manipulation.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's true, but I kind of, when I look at refs, I think like there's always a better way. if you're using refs, and I'm sure there's moments when you should be using it. I'm sure that those, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty rare. And usually when it hasn't come up for me yet, but when I see a ref, I'm like, oh, could you just do it in a different way? And
yeah, we have some ref usage because of the jQuery stuff. So with Bootstrap, you either use a ref or you will have to query the DOM inside the view component, and that it's much better to use a ref than to query the DOM inside the view component. So that's why we use some refs.
But if your whole thing is in Vue and you don't need to connect to the jQuery stuff, you probably should.
We don't have ref usage if everything is in Vue. But then again, we don't have any page where everything is in Vue. We always have jQuery. So
yeah, I think one area I've noticed where refs can be very appropriate is when you need to modify like ephemeral DOM state, like state that you can't modify just like the HTML to change. So for example, when you need to like focus an element
that's
programmatically,
very useful.
That's a case where like, a ref totally makes sense.
Right. But you can see how it could be abused.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could just have a component that is a div, and then like uncreated or like unmounted, you access the ref and then just change that div. And then you could just be like using all jQuery from there. You could have a Vue component with none of the benefit, essentially.
Yeah, you could just have a Vue component that has jQuery installed and then just do your spaghetti code within the Vue component.
Yep, within the mounted.
Yeah,
I think we still have a few of those.
And all it does is render a div.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously though, like that could be a good place to start. Like if you have like, okay, we want to at least modularize like this group of jQuery code, so that it's this separate thing that's not mixed in with all these other things. You could start with that, and basically Vue isn't doing anything, but
it's in.
But it's in, exactly.
Right.
And then you can start pulling out parts of the jQuery and adding more like real Vue code.
I think that was one of the biggest things, is like we kept coming upon this thing where it felt like it was all or nothing. It was like you either rewrite like large sections of the page in Vue or you don't. And it was hard to find like a middle ground where you could just like kind of maybe insert it a little, that idea that you have it's a really good idea. It was just always a little bit hard to find like a middle ground where you weren't just like ripping everything out and inserting Vue, and it turned into this huge merge request. And that was a major sticking point.
Yeah. And I think another thing is that, these huge blocks of jQuery can also usually be broken down into subcomponents, so that at some level, like you can still use a component-based architecture to get these like concrete things that only handle like one specific kind of thing. And that way you can organize things with Vue, but you still are, you're still using jQuery essentially everywhere to do all the heavy lifting. And then at that point, instead of having like one huge component for this whole page, you have like 10 different components for the page, and changing each one can be done independently and can be done a little bit more easily than trying to wrap your mind around the whole thing at once.
I think we did something similar to that, right, Phil, for the issue page sidebar?
Yeah, the issue page sidebar probably is this weird little mediator type of setup where it goes through a class and updates some jQuery stuff and updates other components.
So changing topics a little bit, GitLab is a little bit different from most software teams, I'd say, partly in the sense that it's open source, so any code that you write is, or maybe not all the code, but a lot of the code that you write at least is freely available for like anyone in the world to see.
All the code.
All the code? Really? All of it?
All the code.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, like, what are the unique challenges of maintaining an open source Vue app? Or are there any?
There are good things. So when we started using Vue, with Vue 1, we wouldn't have Vue files, I think. So we were using JavaScript files. But for that, we need an extra tool to compile everything. And we have like this roadmap issue to move all JavaScript files into Vue files, all the components into Vue files components. And we have a contributor that has been doing that for us. Like he's been steadily helping us moving everything to a better state. So there are very good things.
Deploy more, pay less with DigitalOcean, the simplest all-in-one cloud computing platform for developers. Scale and run cloud applications faster and more efficiently with effortless administration tools to robust compute, flexible configurations, networking services, real-time alerts, and rapid provisioning while enjoying industry-leading price to performance with a flat pricing structure across all global data center regions at any usage volume. Spend more time building better web apps and less time worrying about managing infrastructure with DigitalOcean. Build your next app on DigitalOcean. Get started with a free $100 credit at do/co/viewsonvue.
Awesome.
And I think it's not just the code, but most of the discussion behind the code is also out in the open too. So that's another tricky thing too. If you're not used to that, then it's definitely a tricky thing because you're making these, like, you're trying to build consensus kind of while everybody's watching, which consensus building feels like a more private idea, like a more private matter. So that's a tricky thing too, because people have like different opinions about how things should go down. So, but it's really important to get the whole team on the same page. But you just have to do that out in the open.
Yeah, when I first started getting into open source, one of the biggest barriers for me was just how vulnerable I felt. It's like, but what if I decide later that this was stupid? And what if I find out later it's like, oh yeah, this is totally the wrong way to solve the problem? And the truth is
okay.
The truth is like that happens and it's okay. But
you just go there and say, look, I was wrong. Let's make it the other way. We've learned something in the process. That's okay.
Yeah. It took me a while to get to a point where I could be okay with people seeing my shame. And now I still have some open source libraries that have not needed any kind of updates or anything. And I've purposely not updated. That is like, it's written poorly, but you know what, it works. And it's like, it's tested and stuff like that. So like, we can confirm that it works. But like in Ruby, for example, like one of my first open source Ruby projects, I was using if some condition, then. And the then, a lot of people don't even know that you can have a then, but like you can, and it's totally unnecessary. Like it doesn't do anything. And so like when I started working with more people, they made fun of me for the then, but I'm keeping it.
Yeah, that's the thing. And especially when you're moving like fast, you're releasing stuff every month and you're releasing it in the open source. You're kind of like the stuff that I'd say you're moving faster than like where in some other companies you might like take months to like craft every single little detail and stuff. And where at GitLab you're iterating, it's especially a vulnerable thing to just, put stuff out there as like a first iteration.
Kind of curious. Have you had people leave GitLab because like they weren't comfortable with that kind of workflow, because they weren't comfortable being that vulnerable?
I don't think anybody's. I think more what's happened is like people come in and they're just kind of like shocked.
But before everyone joins, like everyone that joins knows that GitLab is completely public. Our handbook is public. Our interview process is public. So you actually have to read bits of the handbook before going through the interview process. So I don't think it's a scenario where you get hired and all of a sudden you realize everything is open. You already know that part.
Oh, that's great.
We also have, we get a tremendous amount of people that apply and there's a lot of really fanatic GitLab, like people that want to be GitLabbers. And so a lot of the people that come in are like ready to do the GitLab thing from the start, which is really cool.
I'm curious, was the public or the community privy to the conversation that you had when you were switching over to Vue?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was all out in the open. And I'll tell you something that just kept happening is that like the public wanted us to switch to React because we kept getting these merge requests where because in Sprockets, it's really easy. You just add a line, it says React, and then bam, it's in. So we just kept getting these merge requests that had React, like a full feature made in React. Even after we chose Vue, that happened several times. And the people had, different opinions about it, but the community was so incredibly supportive and very helpful in, that's the thing that you think like if you're out in the open, people are going to criticize you and people are going to make fun of you. But usually what happens is that people are just willing to help and people are very nice and kind. And if they see a bug, they usually just report it and they're like, hey, I think this should be fixed, or they fix it themselves and they put out the code. And, as long as everybody's nice, it usually turns into this wonderful like community situation where everybody's just kind and helping each other out.
Yeah.
So when people committed React code, did you have to nudge them and be like, can you convert this to Vue? And were they receptive to that?
What I did is I just said, hey, we really appreciate the contribution. Like I think that's the part, like we really, really appreciate it. Really do appreciate it when you contribute. However, we are not using React at this time. And so we're not going to use this in its current state. We are using Vue. If you want to, move it over, I'll close this for now, but feel free to like put it into a situation that kind of works for us. You feel bad because it's a lot of times it's like a lot of code and.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, we were kind of earlier talking about some problems about backend integration. And
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up.
we're thinking on the same wavelength. Yeah. What was your backend integration? What's your backend like? What was the integration with Vue like? How did you find that to be compared to what you're doing already with jQuery? What troubles and challenges did you find?
I tried to say from the beginning that we were going to do this JSON return JSON all the time. And, we kind of had a mixture in the front end of some things we're using, a couple of things we're using the API. A lot of stuff was using the Rails. Like HTML returns, and a lot of stuff was just being like rendered by Haml and stuff like that. And so we had to I tried to work with Dimitri to find like a good way to do JSON. And so in the beginning, it was just in the very, very beginning, it was a bunch of like respond to JSON and like just returning like JSON on a one-off basis. And then I think slowly we started to go in a different direction. But in the beginning it was really tricky because like we just weren't doing anything that was like preparing us to use Vue as a backend.
We still have a few problems though. So because everything is server-side rendering and there's a lot of information that are either on the global scope or just on the server. So all the routes are handled by Rails. So if you want to provide routes into the Vue application, you either duplicate everything and you will have a big problem if you change a route, or you need to provide them through. What we do is we use the server-side rendering YAML, provide them through data attributes, and then consume them as properties in the Vue application, which is something it's not very maintainable when you have tons of code. So it's something that we are looking forward to change.
When you get a chance to do it, from the get-go, which I'm getting a little bit of chance to do right now, you can set up your perfect API and you can just have Vue do everything. Like you can run the Vue CLI and just like start from there. And that's like a really, really perfect situation, but it's tricky. Like if you already have stuff that's built to and especially like a ton of stuff that's already put in place. It's really tricky to kind of change the ways of the existing application.
I think we're moving towards a public API though, because we have a public API and internal API. They do different things, and I think we are moving towards just one, so we can have everything in the API. Have just one single page application per area. So right now, in every route that has Vue, we have one or more Vue applications, and the goal is to have bigger ones, like we have with the Web IDE, that you don't pass that much data from Rails into Vue in every single route. So our goal is to remove all of that.
I think the other thing to remember though is like, it's like if you're thinking like, why didn't we do this already? Because it's like the focus is to make GitLab better and to create these features. So a lot of times the features are taking the priority more than just like changing the infrastructure of our Vue stuff. That has to happen slowly, or a lot slower than, Yeah,
now that we know better how to handle Vue and how to handle Vuex, we are like in the beginning we were learning what to do with Vue, and we were actually learning what we were doing wrong. So now that we already know, so I think for the past 5 months we are moving a little bit faster in some directions, like this bigger single page applications. We actually have a solid plan on how to handle reusable components now. So it took us a lot of mistakes, but now we are heading in a good direction.
I'm curious. You say you're doing a lot of server-side rendering. You're not talking about just initial pages, right? You're talking about through the whole app using Rails.
Yeah.
So would you, based on your experiences with Vue, do you feel like the pairing isn't as perfect? Would you move away from having so much server-side rendered code and let Vue do more of the rendering if that were feasible and easy?
Yeah, the way it is right now, it's not. Look, it works, but performance-wise, it isn't great because you have to wait for the server-side rendering, and then you have to wait for the Vue application to be mounted, and then you have to wait for the API request setup, and so you wait a lot more than you would have if it was just one of the ways. So,
right.
But I think maybe when we started, there was no better way to do it without stopping development for a while. I don't know, but we are thinking of changing that exactly with the biggest single page applications. Maybe even having. I don't think that will happen in GitLab, but if you want server-side rendering, better do it with Vue instead of Rails and then Vue.
Well, I mean, granted, it's super cool the fact that it works and you can do this. And you can go from a system where you got Rails, you got all the server-side rendering, and still be able to add in Vue, because most of the time when you have a system like that, you're like, well, we just need a little bit of stuff. Let's just throw in some jQuery, and you feel stuck there. So it's so cool that this is an option. But it does seem like the two kind of want to fight against each other. And all the other frameworks have the same problem. At least they're just trying to do their initial renderings on the server-side because of the performance. Right?
Yeah. We have that problem, but it's getting better. So I think we will get in a better state.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is you say I just want to add a little bit of jQuery, but you never just add a little bit of jQuery. it just keeps building and building until, yeah.
Is this like a drug user? It's like I just want one hit, and then I'm done.
It's probably more like a Beanie Baby collection or something like that, because it's not worth very much in the end. It's
not that bad. Like if you remember, when you didn't have jQuery, it was a lot worse. Try manipulating the DOM without jQuery and without having Vue or React.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It was a lot worse. And also, I don't think, we've been comparing jQuery with Vue, but I'm not sure if they're comparable, because I would compare Vue with Backbone or Angular or Ember that used jQuery, not jQuery with. I think it's a little bit unfair to compare both.
Yeah, one's just a DOM manipulation situation. Vue's like a big, but the other thing is we could have continued with the jQuery stuff. We were functional, and we got stuff done, and we probably could have built the whole issue boards with jQuery, and we probably would have come up with some really good structural ideas, and we would have definitely got there. So yeah,
just a little. It just would take a lot longer. Like Phil did the boards in 1 month. I don't think. Do you think you could do that in 1 month with jQuery, Phil?
There's no way.
Yeah, I think jQuery is more of like a general purpose utility library. So it's like Lodash, but its scope is so broad that it's just like anything you might want to do like on the client.
It's so easy that you wind up using it for way more than you should be using it. And it's so easy that you just wind up suddenly writing a ton of it. And yeah.
So you're kind of moving into one of the other questions that I had, and we touched on it a few other times. That basically is the big question of, was it worth it? And I sort of mentioned this before we started, but it's easy as a developer to say it's always worth it to go and use the new, latest, shiny, fun tools. We all like playing with whatever is fun and new as developers. But from a business standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, after all this is done, in what ways is GitLab better off from a business standpoint, user experience standpoint, et cetera?
I mean, I know for sure it was definitely 100% worth it, even though there were struggles. I mean, I think if you look at, I think that our struggles are linear, where I think they would have been exponential if we would have continued in the current way that we were going. I mean, there's no question about it. Even though we had, a lot of things to overcome to adopt you, it was without a doubt absolutely worth it. And the other thing is that I don't think we took it. I certainly didn't take it as like the new shiny toy. Like I never want to just like adopt the new shiny toy. For me at least, and I know in the conversations with Phil, it was like, is this going to make our lives easier? Because you compare TVs in the store, but once you get home, you have it, and then you got it, and you don't compare it to anything else anymore because you're using it. So there's no reason to like continually compare it to other frameworks. To us, it was like, this is going to actually make our lives easier. This is going to like, and so specifically, like you just talk about, like Filipa said, that you have like the issue boards that took a shorter amount of time than they would have taken. And then even just proof of concepts, like the web IDE, the first round that I did with it, I didn't necessarily write it fantastically. I didn't follow all the best practices, but I did get it to a point where it was like a proof of concept that we could build upon. I don't think I could have ever written that thing in jQuery or like gotten that idea out there in 1 month. It was almost too big for 1 month I was definitely too big for 1 month for Vue also. But from a business perspective, these proof of concepts that you want to create are so easy to just like spit them out with Vue, especially now that you have like the Vue CLI. You just like write a thing and it's already got ESLint, like all these things that you struggled with before to get like adopted. It's already kind of got them all pre-built in, and it's really, really nice. So proof of concept wise, that's just fantastic.
So it sounds like being able to iterate really quickly, like much faster than you were before, is one advantage that you came across.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then less bugs, because bugs cost money. I know that we definitely created far less bugs than we would have before. I mean, there's tons of advantages to switching to Vue. And then also you have, because like a stressed out developer, like a happy developer is worth more than like from a business standpoint, is worth more than a stressed out developer, because a stressed out developer is not going to be as productive and they're not going to want to do their job. And when life is easier, then, by using Vue, if life is easier, then that's going to make a better situation for the person, especially. And then also everybody else is going to benefit as well. I think it just makes it a more pleasant development experience.
So there's someone that I was talking to a little while ago who, is still mostly using jQuery. And they confessed to me, like I've been programming for a while. I can build stuff with jQuery, like all this new stuff that's coming out. Like, I don't have a computer science degree or something. Like I worry that like I might just not be smart enough for it.
Which is ridiculous, because I mean, it's not ridiculous. It's a common idea, especially when you use something for a long time, And especially like when you're good at it, you've got your thing down, you know how to do it and everything. I think of all the things that you would try, Vue is the best one to just step out and give it a try, because the what is that called? The curve, the
Learning curve?
The learning curve is just really, really, really small. To just even be productive, it's just so small.
I think he understood the feeling of your friend. It's like a feeling of missing out on all the shiny things. How do you learn all these things? Because it's not just learning a tool. You actually need to learn the component system. It's not worth it if you go into an interview saying, yeah, I can review, but then you cannot explain the component system, because then it's not. I don't think it doesn't matter how to know how to work with Vue if you don't understand the concept behind it. But I think everyone, even if you are using Vue and Vuex, I still have that feeling all the time. Like, what if I have to leave GitLab and go to a React company? Like, I don't know React anymore. I think everyone has that feeling.
But I think it's also, like you said, like you were talking about the idea that you could just take jQuery and put it into a Vue component. Like, there's the small steps that you can take with Vue. Maybe if that's not the first small step, that idea that you can be productive so early on makes it like it makes it a really good choice. And that's the thing with front-end development. There's like so many new shiny things coming out all the time, and you're just constantly looking at them, and you have a fear of missing out, right? It's just the FOMO, like Filipa said, and should I be trying all those? And like, you've got your thing that works and all that stuff. But
so it sounds like you'd say, like, drop it in with a script tag like jQuery, like forget about Babel, forget about like Webpack, forget about like hot reloading and like all these, .vue files, all these different tools that we can use to improve our developer experience, and just like start writing some code.
Well, we certainly didn't know about all those things from the beginning.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say it's a lot more useful if you know the core language. Like, if you don't know JavaScript, down the road you can't write maintainable code. It doesn't matter if you know a tool very well. You need to actually know the basics. You need to learn how to use a browser, how to write the core features, how to use a map, a reducer. Those kind of things are a lot more important. Even when you're learning a new tool like Vue or Redux or Angular or whatever the tool is.
But I would also say that for your friend who, has been doing jQuery for a really long time, I mean, that's how I started with Vue, is just dropping it in a script tag. And that first step is just, and you don't necessarily need to know Webpack to know the intro to Vue. You do not need that, like, for your first minute. And I don't think, like, to learn all the parts of Vue, because it's so incremental. All the parts are there and you'll learn them, but it's so functional even as you learn those individual parts, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure I do completely understand.
So, like, you can't really go skydiving until you understand all the parts. Otherwise, like, you can't just take a leap of faith out of just knowing a tiny little bit about skydiving. But like with Vue, if you understand, like, the double, the handlebar thing, and you understand the binding, it's like with a data something or other. If you understand that, you can already get something done, and then you can move on to components. Like, you technically, I'm not saying it's the best code ever, but you can technically do stuff without components in Vue. Like, you just have an app, and you can just like write things without components at all, and it'll still work, right? Not saying it's the best thing, but it's still functional and it does work. It physically works.
The main thing is, like, you need to understand what problem you're solving. So if you don't understand what Vue is solving, then you probably won't understand how to use Vue. It's the same problem we had with Vuex. So we had a lot of discussions in GitLab, because not everyone understood exactly which problem Flux was solving. Which problem would Vuex solve for us? So until we got to the page where we got everyone to understand exactly what is the problem that these tools solve, then it's harder to get them.
What resources would you recommend to help people understand, like, what exactly, like, is Vue solving? What does it do? What is it for?
besides talking to Filipa, like we should just give out Filipa's information. Everybody can call Filipa and get it.
Yeah, we'll be leaving her phone number in the show notes.
Yeah. And Phil. Phil's really good at explaining this stuff. And so is Fatih. Yeah. But not to suck up, but those view docs are really, really good. And I when I was learning this stuff, I didn't use anything other than the view docs because the docs are just so good. So I think if you start with the docs, like Filipa tells me all the time, she's like, it's in the docs. Everything you need to know is in the docs, right?
Yeah, it's true.
It tells you that, like,
with some exceptions. I mean, there are times where it's like, oh yeah, I guess I don't mention this anywhere, and then I have to add it. So,
right.
You're not crazy. You're not going crazy if you can't find something. It may be my mistake. So feel free to open a pull request or an issue.
Right, but you can just like I think I tweeted this, but it was like that. Because my friend just called me the other day and he's like, I don't want to use React. I want to try out Vue and all this stuff. And he's like, can you give me some YouTube tutorials and stuff like that I should look at? I'm like, no, well, just go look at the docs, go read the docs, because that will solve all of your problems. Like I promise you could just use the docs and that's enough. It's one of those frameworks that really just, I'm not sure. I haven't totally figured out if like you're just really good at writing docs or Vue's so simple that you can just use the docs. But I've never had a situation where I'm like, just like, usually back in the day, you would start watching a bunch of YouTube videos and all this stuff. And you just really don't have to do that. With Vue.
It's sort of a long story, but I think with Vue 2, we kind of stumbled on something that was like basically documentation driven development. Like I was writing the docs as like Evan was building the main library.
That's a really good idea.
And this isn't something that was planned or anything, but like I would run into things where it's like, I'm not sure how to explain this. Like it seems confusing that it works like this here when it works like that there. And then we'd have a discussion and, on the team, like someone would come up with some better idea. And it's like, oh, wouldn't it be like, what if we did it this way? Like, and that could still work here. And then like, we'd be able to explain it. And it's like, oh yeah, that works perfectly.
Yeah. I think that those have got to be the best docs that I've ever seen, because the one thing that's really good about them is this, especially if like you're the person, like your friend who doesn't want to like really take the leap, is that they're very concise too. They're not like extensive, like 90,000 pages of really complicated, like they're written in very, like it's like someone speaking to you and they're short. There's not a ton of, it's not overly, not a ton of stuff to read. Yeah, it's not overly verbose or anything like that. It's like very well communicated and it's short and concise. It's terse.
And I do have to say, we have like we have hundreds of contributors to the docs. And a lot of the stuff that I've developed, like I am like taking inspiration from other things in the community. Like, Gitlab, for example, had a style guide before we did. And the style guide that I think Filipa mostly wrote was one of my prime sources of inspiration for developing our internal style guide that we use for the whole Vue community.
The source of inspiration for that was the React style guide. So,
yeah, and I looked at that too. You're talking about the Airbnb one?
Yeah.
And I looked at Embers and stuff like that. So I'm really just drawing from people who like have thought about these problems like much more than I have, and trying to distill best practices from those.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that like. Although there's a lot of like unopinionated ways of writing Vue, after you read the docs, you kind of get the gist of the way that like it's intended to work. And so like if you read the docs completely and you start writing it, you can kind of feel when you're going in the wrong direction. That's the way at least it works for me, is that you get this feeling that like, wait a second, this is all very purposeful and put together very well so that it works like straight out of the box. I also find myself not having to like, I don't find myself like looking up like drop down libraries or, like you used to do in jQuery, look up all these plugins and stuff, because it's usually like inconsequential to write the thing in the first place with Vue that I don't think I've ever used. And I know there's all this stuff out there for Vue, all these components that people create, but I don't think that we wound up using anything like that.
No, it's planned, but we haven't used it yet. We will be using it soon.
Have you guys implemented plugins internally as you were building out components for Vue, though, even though you don't use external plugins?
Can you
I
ask
don't
that
think
again?
So.
Yeah. Have you guys created plugins or components, or not components, but plugins that you use in your Vue application? For example, like if it's used across multiple places, you would just like put it in a plugin and then include it elsewhere. Have you done that before, or it's mostly just components? Yeah.
I think.
There's one place. There's one place where you use a plugin. It's the internationalization.
Oh yeah, it's
Some like really old libraries, so all our locale go through a plugin that we just made.
Gotcha. Okay, that's really cool, and that's open source. So
Yeah.
that's really sweet.
It was actually really cool. Phil, you wrote that, right?
Yeah, so I didn't actually write the library behind it. It uses some super old JavaScript library behind it, but it's just a simple plugin that adds in methods that we can use in Vue.
So what was your decision when you decided to create that as a plugin? Was it just because it was being used in multiple places and you figured that was the best?
Yeah, that was me. I think it was going to be used everywhere.
Yeah.
It's a Vue plugin built on top of actual JavaScript methods, so it just like pushes out to them methods created somewhere else that you can use everywhere.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Okay. How about we move on to picks? Unless anyone has any burning questions. Beautiful. Excellent. So picks is where we pick a few things and that we're into that may have to do with development or not development.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
And I'm going to say, Joe, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So I got 3 picks today, which is kind of a lot, but I'm really excited about all of them. All right. So the first one, I want to again mention that we've got the Framework Summit coming up at the beginning of October. Come out and spend a couple of days at a fantastic conference about all front-end frameworks. Listen to Chris speaking and Divya speaking. But there's something new that's happening in association with the Framework Summit that is really exciting, and I'm excited to kind of announce here. The day before the Framework Summit, we're going to be having, and this is sort of a working name at the moment, but Framework Creators Summit, where the teams of Vue, Angular, React, Ember, Elm will all be in the same room together, spending the day talking to each other, learning from each other, and getting better at doing the really important parts of a framework, which is managing communities and open source and all that sort of stuff, and documentation. And I imagine that Chris will have a lot to give to the other teams on how to run documentation and do it well, since Vue is very well known for its fantastic documentation. So I'm really excited about that.
I've learned from other communities too. I think
right.
The other docs also like do some really cool things that we're also still learning from.
Right. Yeah. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be part of the Framework Summit happening the day before. It's not a attendee event, so it's not something people can go and watch, but we will be probably producing some kind of a transcript that will go out to the community. So look for more information about that. My second pick is very Vue related. I don't know that we even mentioned this, but sometime last week, the Vue GitHub project passed React for a number of stars, which is a pretty big milestone. But even though that's very noteworthy, I think what was far, far, far more noteworthy is that the React team sent a cake to Evan Yu to congratulate him on this occurrence. And there's this really cool tweet that Evan put out with a picture of the cake that the React team sent. And I personally think that is freaking awesome. And one of the reasons why I was really excited to be able to work on the Framework Summit is getting people together to celebrate each other's successes and share knowledge, and that life isn't a zero-sum game. As we help each other out, everybody grows and gets better. And so my hat's off to the React team for doing such a really cool thing to send a congratulations cake over to Evan. And finally, something completely unrelated and fun. I like to play Overwatch, although I've uninstalled it so that I can get work done. It tends to creep in too much into my work time, so I had to uninstall it recently. But I do still occasionally watch YouTube videos about it. I found this great streamer named Jane, Jayne, who does coaching and analysis. So if you're into Overwatch at all, he's a great YouTube personality to watch and subscribe to. And those are my picks.
Thank you. Divya, would you like to go next?
Sure, I will. So my picks is, I have 3 picks as well. The first one is Sarah Drasner's VS Code extensions for Vue. She published a GitHub repo of that, which is really cool. And I've used it. And it actually helped me because, so last week I did a live demo of creating a basic form in Vue. And I used all of her extensions and it went beautifully. I didn't convince, it's funny because the talk was meant to convince people to use Vue, but it actually convinced people to use VS Code. And if anything, it's kind of successful. So that's one of my picks. The second pick is Adi Osmani's talk at FluentConf, which was about the cost of JavaScript. And he goes into, Adi Osmani does a lot of talks on JavaScript and performance. And so this talk is pretty much that, where he goes into detail about the recent additions to Chrome and Chrome dev tools and so on. And then my third pick is this little web app called netlify.netlify.com, which was done by Mariko Kosomari. And she, I believe, is a developer or a developer advocate. She works at Google. And the app essentially takes an image and converts it into stitches that you can use to knit, which I think is really a really neat way of, using technology in a tangible way. So those are my picks.
Great. Filipa, would you like to go next?
So I have 2 picks. One is also from Sarah Drasner. She made these 2 tweets about understanding the almighty reducer. So if you're new to JavaScript, those are very, very useful. And the second one is for a newsletter that I follow. It's called Coffee Table Typography. And if you're into typography, it's the most beautiful newsletter you'll see about it. You have you have typography from the web, from design books, and there's this little section in every issue about coffee, which is also very very nice. And it's a very highly curated newsletter. I highly recommend it.
Excellent. Thank you. Phil Hughes.
So I've got 2 picks. My first one's completely unrelated to anything development. Last week, me and my family took a week on holiday to Centre Parks, mainly Europe-based. So if anyone's in Europe, I would totally recommend it. It's nice just to disconnect in the forest. My daughter went pony riding. She had a whale of a time.
I love Sun Parks.
It's called Centre Parks.
Oh, Centre Parks. Oh,
yeah, it's a holiday type village in the forest where there's barely any internet connection. It was so nice just to disconnect from everything. And then the second one, I've been struggling with my wrist and typing at the moment, so I bought myself an ErgoDox EZ. It's not arrived yet, but I would totally recommend everyone to check it out.
Is that a chair?
No, it's a split keyboard.
Oh, it's a split keyboard.
Great. Thank you. So, Jacob, what are your picks?
So I have a hard time disconnecting, and I always like to do side projects, work on things on the side. And so as a little side project, I'm creating a Vue app for part of our data science team. And since I'm writing the front end and the back end, I wanted to find something that I could just write a really good API with. And I've always had a ton of fun writing things with Flask. And so one of my picks is Flask because I really enjoy writing Python, and I enjoy writing Flask because it's just a tiny little framework that doesn't have a lot of opinions, and it's got a lot of really cool the database connections and all that stuff. It's really great. SQL Alchemy, it's all really cool. And the Python community is amazing. And then the only other thing I had was that we've been watching The Americans, which is a fantastic show. And if you haven't watched it yet, actually, I think we're going to watch the last episode tonight. And I'm really excited to see what happens in the last episode. It's a really, really good show.
Thank you. All right, in my picks, I have 3. The first one is viewmeetups.org, which was created by Ben Hong. And it is a great resource for anyone who wants to find meetups in their area or create a meetup. Like, it actually gives you a lot of instructions for like what you need to do to create a meetup. Like, how do you get sponsorship? How do you get speakers and stuff like that? Answering a lot of questions that normally no one really answers for you. Like, I kind of feel like even if you want to start a meetup that is not about Vue, but just like related to technology, this is a really good resource to check out. Once again, that's viewmeetups.org, created by Ben Hong, a member of our community that we're very grateful for. My second pick is The Witness, which is a game built by a team that's led by the same developer who made Braid, Jonathan Blow. If you've played Braid, it's just one of the best games of all time. And I'm really, really enjoying The Witness. It is so relaxing to solve interesting puzzles in a beautiful environment. And I can like jump in and jump out when I only have a little bit of time, which is often the case. It reminds me of Myst in a lot of ways, which is an older game some of you might know, except I'd strongly, strongly encourage you to not use a guide. Myst it could be a little bit like difficult, and especially some sequels like Riven. Like if anyone says that they've beaten Riven without a guide, I'm pretty sure they're lying. Like I can't imagine how that'd be possible because some of the puzzles just don't make any sense. But that is not the case here. Everything is very, very well thought out in The Witness. And I haven't needed a guide yet. And I think I've almost beaten the game. I'd say if you get stuck, just wander around, do something else, come back to it later. Because you will, like the puzzles teach you, and you will learn more about how everything works as you wander around. And my final pick is something that's a little bit weird. It is a communication tool that my wife and I invented. We call it our request system. And I now use this with like all of my closest friends, partners, to communicate about anything. And when you're asking someone for something, we find this really useful. It goes from 0 to 4. A 0 is something that is not a request, but an offer. A 1 is something that you'd like, but it's not a big deal if you don't get it. A 2 is something that you'd really like. It'll make your day. 3 is something that you're not sure you'll be okay if you don't get it. And 4 means you need to drop what you're doing right now and give this to me. Because I will not be okay. And this is so useful. One quick example is if there's like some kind of, like a event that I don't really want to go to, but Katie wants to go to, and she's asked me if I want to go. And normally you could be thinking in your head, like, gosh, like, is this something that's really important? Like they don't ask me to go do a lot of things. Like maybe I have to go. So maybe you'll go and you'll hate it the whole time, not realizing that like, oh, it was actually a 0. Like I was offering, like you can come if you want, but I don't care. And if you're just gonna be miserable the whole time, like I'd really prefer you to stay home. So this gives you a tool to start having those conversations. And like all of the fights and arguments that we've avoided by using this system, and the same with like other people that I've used it with, it's amazing. It is seriously life-changing. I'm not going to say it again, but you can rewind and listen to it again if you'd like. It is so useful. I hope it brings much happiness to all. And I think that is all for Views on Vue.
Wait.
Oh, what?
You
Go ahead.
to like expound upon this. Like, so like when you're chatting with your wife, you say, "Hey, honey, I want to go play golf. Do you want to come with me? This is a 0." Is that like it, or
first, if I were asking her if she wanted to play golf, I think it'd be at least a -3. I'd really prefer not to. Like, I think I'll probably have a horrible time. Yeah. So yeah, but let's say for the golf example, yeah, you'd say, am I asking her if she wants to come, or am I asking her if I can go? Or
you're asking her if she wants to come, right? Like,
yeah, so I'd say
the opposite of the example you had where she said she wanted you to come to some activity, right?
Yeah, and so I'd really like to go. I might say, for me it's a 2. Like, I'd really like it. it would make my day if you could join me.
So is this mostly like verbal communications? You use this like when you're sending texts back and forth or other types of
any kind of communication. Yeah, and if I don't provide a number, she can ask, "What number is it?"
Gotcha.
So that she has that context, because sometimes we forget to provide it.
That's pretty cool.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
You need like little flashcards. You just hold up the flashcard.
Well, it's just 4 numbers, or probably really 5 numbers if you include 0. So it's not that hard to remember, but I will be writing a 600-page self-help book that will be coming out soon. You can look forward to it.
I think you'd actually end up on the bestseller list or something like that. How long have you been doing this?
Oh, years now.
Years.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, years.
Do you have any like in years? Do you end up
That's why we have no problems in our relationship. I'm just kidding.
So do you have like shortcuts? You just like, honey, golf, and you hold up like 2 fingers or something?
We don't really need a shortcut. It's just the number. It's just the number. Like, you don't need like, oh, I don't want to say the number 4, so I'll just hold up numbers or something like that.
Do you prefix your texts with like 3-food?
It's really not that complicated. I think it's like I'm thinking, or like if someone's coming home, like let's say, I am out and running some errands, and Katie texts me and say like, hey, do you want to pick up some Thai food on the way home? It's a 1 for me.
Right.
Like that. That's an example. Or normally she'd just say like, it's a 1. Yeah. So I guess that's the shorthand, because I assume it's for her.
So it's 0 is an offer. I don't care. 1 is no big deal.
Yeah. 0 is not a request, but an offer. 1 is you'd like it, but it's not a big deal if you don't get it. 2 is you'd really like it. It'll make your day. 3 is you're not sure you'll be okay if you don't get it. And 4 is you need to drop what you're doing right now. So like an example of a 4 is like, like I've had panic attacks before. If I feel a panic attack coming on and I don't feel like I can like get out of it, if it feels like it's spiraling out of my control, like I'll tell her it's a 4 for her to help me with this.
That's great, because then you can say calmly, you can say, hey, I'd really like your help with the panic attack. It's a 4. And you don't have to like scream everything, You don't need to create an emergency. You don't need to use your emotions to give them the clue that it's an emergency.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when you're like right in the middle of the symphony, you don't want to make a scene.
Playing golf and like going to symphonies. What life do you think I lead? And sometimes when I'm at the opera, anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you everyone for joining us on Views on View. We look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, enjoy the view.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHE